3-day virtual events, challenge funnels, whichever one you call them or decide to go with, lump sum funnels, a lot of money you can make. Therefore, we have a whole series dedicated on this channel and a nice little playlist for you on the best practices of this type of virtual event. And in this video, out of all those videos in the series, we're gonna be covering what to actually cover, the content structure of the virtual event itself. We typically do our virtual events in 3-day formats. Some people do them a little longer, some people do them a little less. I'll talk openly about why we prefer the 3-day. And again, whole topic of this video is going to be diving deep on what you should cover throughout these 3 days, what the flow and the structure should be in order to maximize the total return and the lump sum that you should be able to produce through this type of funnel. So welcome in. If you're new to the channel, all we talk about around here is hitting $1 million months. You're either tacking on the first million month or going after that next million month if you're sitting here watching these videos. And per usual, we have no idea who the fuck you are and whether you have any probability at all to go out there and hit $1 million months. According to the US Bureau of Labor Statistics, the probability to even do $10 million a year, 0.1%, okay? So your odds are really fucking low to do something that's gonna be an even smaller percentile probability to hit $1 million months. But again, if you're sitting here watching this, all we're doing is passing down the lessons of people who have been there, done that, for all our clients over the years, our inner circle members, consulting deals, etc. Just handing down what works. So again, entertainment and education purposes. If you're already a subscriber, welcome back. Absolute pleasure to have you here. Without further ado, let's dive in. So we like to do the 3 days rather than 5 days or 4 days because there's going to be a drop off on each subsequent day. And a lot of people think that during the virtual event, you have to have an extreme, overwhelming amount of content prior to making your pitch to get the most people to convert. Sometimes that's true relative to the pricing and the skepticism and the overall education that might be necessary for your specific niche and what you do. Here's what we do on our end. We found time and time again that 3 days is the sweet spot. That's the pocket. That's the Goldilocks zone, okay? Reason being, day one, we're just gonna do a fuckload of content. Day two, the entire first half of the day, we're gonna do a fuckload of content. We're gonna do our pitch at the end of day two. Day three, we're gonna do a repitch, a VIP upsell pitch. We're gonna do another repitch from somebody else. And then usually we're gonna close it out with another content section. That's a summary of the flow. Now we really have found time and time again that 3 days is the pocket sweet spot Goldilocks zone solely because we've tested those same exact clients with longer formats and shorter formats. And we've done so many of these over the years that again, time and time again, we find that the 3-day ends up being the pocket. You don't need to do more, and if you do less, sometimes it's a little risky because you make a little less from doing less content overall. So anyway, 3 days is the pocket. That's what we're sold on. So therefore, in this video, I'm going to demonstrate to you what type of content you need to plug into each one of those days. Here it goes. Day one, all content, okay? Whatever the actual theme is of the virtual event or whatever the outcome is that you want to help people produce in the challenge funnel, your goal in day one is to break down as much as you possibly can about whatever it is that you're specifically selling people on and talking to them about. Here's the thing. Usually in the first part of the day, like the first and the second session are generally what we call get them in the game content. Okay, the get them in the game content is, it's a way of thinking where you got to try to treat them like they don't understand why whatever you're going to try to get them to do or why whatever you want them to buy into even needs to be bought into in the first place, right? Think about it like this. I'm making the assumption in this exact video right now that you're already sold on doing a virtual event. I'm not really selling you on doing it. I'm sold and I'm thinking you're sold on doing it already. So if you really reflect on how I'm communicating to you right now, it's under the assumption you already understand the premise of why you do this. Because it's a lump sum event and people make a fuckload of money doing it is likely why you're gonna do it, okay? And it's a big, significant lump sum comparatively to any other funnel type that you generally can commit to doing. And it all happens at once, thus why we call it a lump sum funnel. But again, I'm not sitting here making a video. There's not a video in this playlist you'll find on that specific topic. Again, I'm assuming you're already sold on the idea. Now, in a virtual event, in a challenge funnel, you don't typically want to operate under that assumption, okay? A challenge funnel, if you've watched the pricing video for this specific concept, where I talk about the promotional cycle, the price points, when to price it at what prices based on where you're at in the promotional cycle, you'll notice it's relatively low ticket, right? It's tens of dollars or maybe low hundreds of dollars that somebody's going to commit to. Therefore, we have to treat it like any other low ticket product from that perspective. Generally, with any kind of low ticket product we sell, the whole point of it is to help get somebody a result as fast as we can get them a result, okay? The speed in which we can help somebody produce an outcome is the speed in which we are probable to upsell them. Now, here's what's very important to understand about that key concept. Outcomes don't always have to be an actual tangible result that they've gone out and produced. Sometimes all that has to happen in order to get somebody to go from low ticket to high ticket is making them feel like they understand it thoroughly enough to make a decision about what you're going to sell them that's high ticket. You get them in the game mentally, and that's why we open it up with this concept of this get them in the game logic. We want to break down why it makes sense to do whatever you're talking about doing. This is where you give people the background information. This is where you give people like your origination story for how you got into this, or the brand's origination story and like why you do what you do. This is where you go into the data that matters to frame them on everything else they're about to subsequently learn. Now, here's the better way to do this too. Typically, challenge funnels, virtual events, they have like a main speaker, they have a host, they have somebody who's going to be like centric and presenting and making the pitch during the entirety of this event. That's typically the person that opens up, and that's typically who tries to get them in the game. Now, can you strategically bring in other speakers that can also help do this? Yes. That's one thing you'll find is a commonality throughout this whole process of what we're going through here together. You'll hear me reference things like, hey, by the way, you might have somebody else here that gives like a counter take on the exact same thing and further sells on the idea, but from a completely different perspective on why it makes sense to do whatever you're talking to them about doing. You could do that during this section if you wanted to. You'll lose a little bit of authority, but again, just getting them in the game matters a lot in this opening stage of what you're actually going to talk to people about. Now, keep in mind, challenge funnels generally have some type of outcome that you do actually want to help get them. There's some type of tangible result that you want to help them produce. Okay, so if you're doing more of the challenge funnel route where you're actually trying to get them to do something and produce a result, you got to keep in mind this content aligns perfectly to that. And the subsequent steps of what you're going to do in the day for the content are meant to further get them down to the point where they can actually go out after day one, do some kind of homework and get involved in whatever it is you're pitching them on doing. So as an example, we have a guy right now, guy makes a couple $1,000,000 a month teaching people how to trade. This guy in particular wanted to do a challenge funnel. He obviously asked us like, oh, what should I cover? He wanted to do a challenge, not a virtual event. So therefore we were like, oh, listen, first part, origination story, why it makes sense to trade, why you're sold on trading, how trading works, what your trading style is, right? And from there, we start transitioning into teaching them like, here's all the platforms you could use. Here's the specific trading strategies you deploy. Here's how to do something. And like in the very back end part of the day, he'll teach them to do something as simple as like plotting a strategy onto a chart. Or as in another example, using historical data and what we call playback simulation in order to go and actually try to trade some of the strategies that they likely were exposed to on day one. The homework in between day one and day two being something that they can do that makes them feel involved in whatever it is that you're selling them on makes a ton of sense in this example, okay? Anyway, the 3-day virtual event comparatively typically doesn't have an actual outcome that you're trying to help the person produce. It's more so just kind of like an industry event, but virtual, where your central conversation points with them throughout the entirety of the event are focused on a specific topic. They're less outcome based. The entirety of the 3-day virtual events are generally centric around this topic, this conversation of like why you do it, how to do it, you know, and ultimately the high ticket thing speeds up the process to getting the outcome in both scenarios, no matter which one you choose to do. But in the 3-day virtual event, you generally don't have to assign people homework. You generally don't have to focus as much as like getting them involved and making sure they understand it enough to get them involved. You're just trying to, in the 3-day virtual event, make them aware. That's the main thing. Make them aware and try to cover as many conversational points as you can around that central topic. So it's a bit different depending on how you go about choosing to do this. So anyway, back to the point at hand. After you do the get them in the game content, generally it's just further down the process, okay? So I talked to a guy the other day. We got this physical location now. It's crazy, by the way, having a physical location. People will just fucking walk into your business because it's a physical business. We hate that. We have signs on the door telling people get the fuck out of here. But again, random people just fucking walk into my business and are like,
oh, I see you do marketing. Like, what? I got this. Can you help with this? And
oh man, we don't obviously want that. We don't want that, okay? However, it happens. And some of these people that have walked in, they've had like no awareness at all. I have to sell those people on general on the idea of like why paying for ad spend even makes sense. I have to sell them on the idea of like how the whole online world works and like things like funnels and risking money to turn it into more money. You see what I mean? It depends on where somebody's starting at. So are you selling to somebody and are you bringing people into this event that are more like that? Or as another example, like I've got guys, I have a painter that comes by here as a great reference for this point I'm trying to make. He's run ads before. He's tried lead forms. He even has a website website, like he's driven traffic to the website, and he's gotten results through both. But he prematurely cut his ads off because he had comparison bias. He saw a cost that was like $2 to $3 a lead, went up to 17 bucks a lead. The guy was still fucking milking it from a ROAS perspective. But again, he shut it off from naivety. That guy, in comparison, like he's already technically in the game to a degree. I don't have to explain like super base level shit to him. Okay, I can talk to that guy at a higher level like right away. And to be clear, what I'm going to talk about in my challenge obviously needs to be centric around identifying who I'm specifically bringing in the first place. And remember, you control who you bring in through all the front end messaging that you have. Right? If I want to take absolute fucking noobs from total noob to whatever level I want to take them to through the event, yeah, I got to keep that in mind because that's going to center what type of content I need to produce. If I am talking to people who are already like kind of 1 foot in the door and I need to pull them all the way into the door, then I start at a different point and I progress through the event to a different point. I get further along with the people that are already further along. You feel me? So the rest of this content, it's very important and it's fundamental that you understand this, okay? Because if you don't, you're likely going to talk about shit that the people who are already further along don't give a fuck about. And the people who are too entry level, if they're too entry level and you're talking too far along, they're not going to understand what the fuck you're talking about. Okay, so you got to balance these two. You got to be really aware. I can't stress that enough. You got to be really aware about who you're attracting, and therefore that concludes to like what you're technically going to talk about throughout the rest of this thing. Once you get them in the game though, okay, and you make some progressions to these following sessions, you're just furthering the awareness, okay? And that can come from all kinds of different perspectives. So we have a client, she teaches people how to buy businesses, and she does these virtual events at this point twice a year. Now, she'll start her day one by explaining her backstory. She used to work in Wall Street, she quit, she wanted to help regular people get a lot richer. She took a lot of these tactics, specifically on buying businesses, and rolled them out to people in the general public to learn how to buy a business instead of building a business. This has worked tremendously well for her, and she typically starts from the perspective of why you need to buy a business, her origination story, but then right away she jumps into all kinds of shit. How to find the right businesses to buy. What are the right businesses to buy? How to actually buy those businesses, right? And all the different negotiation points and leverage points and literal ways in which you can fund and buy a business or creatively finance a business. And here's my point. That makes a lot of sense for her to cover there. She covers all the categories of what you would generally want to know when it comes to buying a business right in day one. Day one is generally anywhere from like as low as 4 hours, sometimes as high as like 6 hours in content. I've seen people pull it off in 3, so we can technically say as low as about 3 to 6 hours. Okay, sometimes a little longer. Here's my point though. If we look at the trading guy who's teaching people how to trade, his opening, let me get people in the game, is look, why trading makes sense. Why this, like, here's all the different trading styles you could use. Here's why my specific trading style makes the most sense. Here's my origination story and like what got me into this whole thing. And then from there, after we transition into furthering the awareness, we start talking about ways to trade. Like, okay, here's some charts. Here's like making sense of the chart. So you're not looking at something that just seems foreign as fuck. You're like, oh no, this makes sense to me. So we have to get them to understand the chart. Then we start having them understand things like tools and instruments and indicators. Mainly the indicators is what they start to focus on at that point. And at that point, what they typically start to do is teach the strategies, okay? So they get people to understand the chart. Then they start talking about indicators and certain things that you could see on the chart like liquidity. Then they start to explain, well, here's the liquidity strategies that we like to use based on what we just taught you. And then they wrap it all together, okay? That's typically what day one is in a nutshell. Get people in the game and then teach them the subsequent things that they need to understand about this whole thing to make it make sense. We've had a medical company. They sell hyperbaric chambers. They sell red light panels. I believe they sell some other things too, but long story short, essentially oxygen therapy and red light. And again, they do these virtual events where they'll get people to sign up for like a health and wellness summit. And they're learning all these different longevity strategies. They'll start the event by talking about, here's all the different things that you need to know about where we're at in modern medicine, why focusing on longevity makes a lot of sense as it relates to AI and things extending our lifespan further, telling the backstory about how people used to die at like 35 and how we're now probable to die in our low hundreds. And people who choose to focus on longevity can make that possible. And then we further the awareness. They make them aware of all the different technologies that exist. And then they start saying like, and here's what makes sense for the most common people to typically do and focus on. And they talk about things like the oxygen therapy, the red light panels, and like the benefits of some of the specific technologies that they brought up. So they make people aware of a whole bunch of technologies, the least risky, and then they work those to the point at the end of day one where somebody would conclude to the fact that oxygen therapy and red light, dieting, These things all make a lot of sense. Different exercise routines, different equipment they might sell them. Now here's my point. In all three of these examples, they're all doing the exact same thing. They're introducing somebody to the game. They're trying to get them involved in the game through storytelling about the origination stories and just why it makes sense and how the game works, okay? Then they further the awareness. They drill down on specific topics that get the person to conclude to, I understand this a lot more than I did walking into today's event. And that is that low ticket to high ticket result that I'm telling you must have. There has to be that kind of aha moment that occurs in a low ticket product where the individual feels like they got what they paid for. You know, if I buy a book, all it takes is one little sentence out of a book. I don't give a fuck if it's in the first chapter or the last sentence of the entire book. As soon as I get that little aha moment, buying the book and reading the book and spending the time feels worth it. It's not even that I had to go out and get a result with whatever that talked about. Just that little like, wow, that makes a lot of fucking sense. Can't believe I didn't know that. Glad I know it now. That gives me the satisfaction. That's what gives customers the satisfaction who buy a low ticket thing, that they got what they're there for. It also dramatically increases the probability that they buy from us on day 2 when we make our pitch. So anyway, bear with me. We're going on. Here's the moral of the story. That's the result. That's like the outcome of day 1 that you want to make sure that you're satisfying. Okay. And when you go into day 2 starts with kind of an extension of that, where the opening content is typically the same thing, where all you're really trying to do is just, again, further the awareness. Okay. You're talking about more information, more data. Sometimes you're just reinforcing the exact same thing, but from another perspective of talking about that exact same thing. This is a little Apple pencil, okay? On my side of the pencil, it says the word Pencil Pro at the top, but you can't see that. You see whatever you specifically see on this side. My side also has like a flat edge. You see that there? Your side is completely rounded. Now, if I'm looking at my side and you're looking at your side, again, this is the exact same object in either scenario, but I see it completely differently than how you see it. Both of us describing our perspectives to one another helps us understand the entirety of this object to try to make sense of it. However, the person standing down here in the palm of my hand, well, they see something completely different that neither one of you or I can see. And again, we'd appreciate their perspective too. Here's typically what you do on day 2 when I talk about furthering the awareness. You try to bring in some other speakers that can tell the story of the thing that you're trying to talk about and increase the awareness on to a different perspective's view. Right? Their goal is to try to break it down from their worldview on how that thing works. So as an example, we had this client, again, teaching people how to go buy businesses, and she brings in 2 other pretty major personal brands. One of them was in the tech space. This guy teaches people how to scale SaaS companies. Well-known guy, does business coaching in general, but again, came up in the roots of scaling SaaS companies. The second high authority figure has a big business in the real estate education and real estate space in general that teaches people how to do a very specific real estate investing strategy. Now, these 2 people, they might sound like they're in completely different industries and niches. How would they lend any perspective to the idea of buying a business? When in reality, both of these guys have acquired businesses, and both of these guys had very different ways that they leveraged buying businesses to help get them to the point that they're at today. The guy in the SaaS company, he talks about buying businesses from the perspective of rolling companies up to have a greater exit valuation. That's a completely different perspective on the same thing that we're both looking at, that main speaker who's teaching everybody how to buy businesses hadn't touched on. The second person from the real estate space, that guy talked about it from the perspective of being able to acquire a new customer base and being able to take the value that that existing business's technology was providing and providing it to his existing customer base as a new upsell and revenue source. So again, a completely different perspective comparatively to our other authority figure and comparatively to our main character of the event. The trading guy that we're sitting here working with on a consulting deal for this challenge funnel he has coming up, we told him, we're like, look, you have a specific way of trading. You have friends that you know that are also well-known people who trade that you can bring in to do the exact same thing. Teach their perspective on why trading makes sense and let them show how trading in general helped them get to the point where they have whatever level of satisfaction they have in life. Show the outcomes that it helped them produce. Don't necessarily have them sell their way of trading is better than your way of trading. Maybe they even use the same way that you trade. and therefore they endorse it from their perspective, but they have different outcomes in their life compared to you, or maybe they used it for a different vehicle. So the trading guy, he typically trades NASDAQ futures as a main place that he trades. Well, one of the guys that he's going to bring in uses the exact same trading strategies as our main character. However, that guy uses it in the crypto markets. So moral of the story is that guy can say, oh yeah, I use all this in crypto. That shit works over there too. So he's endorsing the main strategy that the main character is attempting to teach people and increase awareness and get people in the game on. But that guy's lending the perspective,
Oh yeah, this shit works outside of what this guy's specifically talking about.
so it kind of handles an objection and deals with that entire segment of the crowd. You understand what I mean? These supporting characters who come in and help increase and further awareness, what they're attempting to do is they're attempting to take the main thing that's being sold, like that central topic, and they're just trying to sell it from other perspectives to help the person who's sitting there at the virtual event or sitting there during the challenge funnel. It's helping them understand the entirety of what you're actually talking about and what it is, okay? That's the main thing you got to understand about day two. So you're bringing in supporting characters usually. And these supporting characters, obviously you want them to be great speakers. You want them to have some authority ideally. Simply put, you got to get them to accomplish what we just sat there and spoke about. Now, these supporting characters, let's use the example of our client that teaches people how to buy businesses. She is not just using external characters. She also had 2 staff members who were also speakers during this 3-day virtual event, one of which is the head of sales. Now, the head of sales has extensive M&A background experience, can go into a lot of technical details about buying businesses. But again, they share completely different perspectives than the main character and how the main character articulates it. So it's not necessarily like a high authority in that example. Same thing with their head of product, who was the second speaker. It's not necessarily a well-known person at all. It's not somebody that you could even look up online and find a ton of information about. This is somebody who just sits there, deals with the buyers of this company all day long, has showed so many people how to buy businesses, understands the most common questions of the people who buy the program to learn how to buy businesses, and is teaching it point blank how to go about buying a business, but from their perspective on the whole thing. And more so in that case, since that guy's the head of the product specifically, teaching people how to do it from really the customer who actually buys the program's perspective and all their technical questions that get asked. And as silly as this sounds, because again, those 2 people are from internally in the company, they share completely different perspectives on how to do the same thing. And it makes the thing that's being sold more well-rounded. You understand? That's the whole point of day 2 for the first half specifically, is we're trying to just further extend the awareness, and we're trying to make sure that we give people more of those aha moments. We want people to have those moments where they're like, that makes total fucking sense. Now, here's the thing. During the second half of day 2, we transition to 2 things. One of them is called the pre-pitch, and then obviously we have our actual pitch, okay? Now, pre-pitch information, one of my favorite people I've ever learned from in my life, his name's Myron Golden. I love Myron. Myron has, give or take the time that he's selling it, probably cost tens of thousands of dollars to go and learn this shit from him. I don't even know what he calls it, to be honest with you. The product that I went and learned with from Myron, he taught what's called the pre-pitch and the repitch, both of which you leverage inside of a challenge funnel or a 3-day virtual event. And he's really good at it. Long story short, even if you just go look up Myron on YouTube, he has one video in particular. Let me see if I can tell you the title of this thing, because this specific video is so good for emphasizing my point that I'm trying to make with you here about how pre-pitch material works. He sits there and he just tells all these stories. Yeah, here it is right here. He calls it the science of rapid wealth creation. And if I don't know if you can see this here, this is what that video looks like. So if you look on his YouTube channel and you go watch, he calls it the science of rapid wealth creation, okay? And in this, I think it's like 30 minutes long. It's a perfect demonstration of Myron's skills to do pre-pitch material put on display. Essentially just one thing after the other, after the other, after the other. He's going through like these little 1 to 3 minute stories where he's proving a point about a way somebody who's got a lot of success and is wealthy thinks, okay? And so typically, like, let's use the 2 examples I provided to you, or even the 3rd example with the hyperbaric chamber red light situation. So for the buying business scenario, the pre-pitch material would sound something like, I'm going to go through some of the characteristics of people who have bought businesses successfully, that have bought our programs and had a lot of success with us. Let me start going through the characteristics of these individuals. What you're then breaking down are these individual, like 1 to 3 minute, sometimes 5 minute long stories where you're talking about somebody who was a bad way of being a thing and became like a good way, or inherited, like dropped the bad characteristic and like inherited a new characteristic. Dropped the bad way of thinking inherited a better way to think. It's essentially just a bunch of reframing that you are priming somebody to actively have top of mind right before you make your pitch. So a great example of this that essentially carries through no matter what is sitting here telling people things about success, talking about characteristics of individuals who make a lot of money. You'd talk about things like risk taking, right? You would say, look, the people who make the most, the people who get the best results, like they know when to take a proper risk. And like, what does a proper risk look like? And then you break down essentially what you're about to pitch them on as an example, where you're like, a great risk can look like an offer presenting itself to you inside of an event like this that point blank tells you exactly what you need to do. And again, if you're committed to doing it and it gets you a faster result, right? That's what successful people do. Successful people, they take timelines and they condense them down to shorter timelines. And like, I'm pretty sure like a literal example that Myron uses in that video I was just showing you, he says something about, look, you could make $1 million. What's the difference between a guy who works at McDonald's and a guy who makes $1 million in a month, right? Well, the difference is how fast they made the money, right? And he'll start going through like compression of time, and he'll strategically plug things that you're about to be pitched on into what can compress time, right? And it's just a bunch of this framing information. It's so good. And you want to have a whole session dedicated to that. And if you want to learn that in extensive detail, we cover a lot of it, but to be fair, Myron is the absolute master of the pre-pitch and the repitch. I fully endorse in any way, shape, or form learning from Myron. Super smart guy. So anyway, back to my point. Once you go through the pre-pitch session, where it's again just a fuckload of framing, that's where you then transition to the point where you actually make your pitch. Okay. And when you make the pitch, we'll have a whole video dedicated on this specific series that we're going through together here on the challenge funnel, the 3-day virtual event. I'll have a whole video I dedicate just to pitching, how the pitch works, how to maximize revenue from the pitch. But just to talk about the flow, at this point, you're making the actual pitch. Okay. You typically tell people, give or take, the pricing. And again, we'll go through all this in a video, to either go book a call, pay a deposit to book the call, or do direct to checkout. Again, all based on the price. And then you just stop. You just stop for the day. You tell everybody, looking forward to seeing you on day 3 tomorrow. We'll cover more content. We're looking forward to seeing you guys. I'm very excited to help you guys out further. See you tomorrow. That's it. You cut them off. Now, typically at this point, if you've done this successfully, obviously this is where you're going to get the highest quantity of booked calls. This is where you're going to get the highest quantity of buyers. This is where you're going to make the most money from. And it should be like a significant spike. Okay. Day 3 starts with what's called the repitch. So back to Myron Golden, outside of the pre-pitch material that he does, one thing that he does, which is much more direct, but it's still very framing based, is what he calls the repitch. So this is, I'll never forget how I learned this. It's like so simple. However, like the way that he strategically does it is professional. It's the best way to do it, in my opinion. So his version of the repitch is much more direct than the pre-pitch. Pre-pitch consider as indirect framing information. Repitch is trying to call out very specific reasons, objection handling, asking people things about why they specifically didn't buy, guessing like what the most common objections are and why people specifically didn't buy. You'd call it out as an example of it, just to be clear. You had an opportunity yesterday to take action and to be a first mover, and like, you anchor back to whatever you talked about and emphasize the success characteristics in your pre-pitch, to be that type of person, okay? And instead of being that type of person, you let that small, tiny little character in your head, that little tiny voice dictate your life again. And then, I'll sit there and like start demonizing like the small version of you and, kind of make you feel like an idiot if you don't take action on it. And then he'll give people these, I've seen him do this in person. It was so good. He got people to essentially like raise their,
Like, who here is willing to be the bigger person now? Who here wants to be their bigger self? Who here is officially going to take the action? Raise your hand.
and he'll get them to raise their hand. He'll be like,
Stand up. All you stand up.
and they all stand up, and he'll be like,
Come up here on stage with me. Come here.
and I've seen him go out in the audience and literally grab their hand and like make a train of people holding their hand, and he'll walk them all onto the stage, and he'll bring them up, and he'll literally like congratulate them. He'll get everybody in the audience to give them a huge round of applause for like overcoming this version of themselves. And then he'll give another opportunity again.
Who wants to join us up here? Who wants to dominate that little self,
And he'll go out there again and like pull more people on stage. And then literally he'll like take them behind the stage after he's done with this whole ordeal, and like he'll close them. And virtually you would do this by like getting these people to be acknowledged on the Zoom, maybe spotlighting them all at once, and like having these people clear and visible to everybody else. And you just simply you're highlighting these individuals and glorifying them and putting them on a pedestal. And anyway, my point is, that's how the repitch is. Like, you just start the day literally with a straight up repitch, okay? And usually this turns into like an objection handling session section. The Q&A all typically happens here as well, where you're just answering questions on the offer, you're answering questions on the actual content that you've talked about. Usually you have a second person. As I talked about prior on day 2, you usually have a second person come in and they do their version of a repitch. Now, depending on what you're selling, sometimes you have higher level people there that it might not make sense for them to buy whatever your main offer is. In that example, you could also have a way between day 2 and day 3 for them to raise their hand and say, I am a higher level person and I would like to hear you out on a higher level pitch that you might have for me. And from that perspective, right, if you get people to raise their hand and say like, yeah, I think I'm bigger than this other offer that you've already presented me, you can also have a totally separate carved out little room solely for those people that you're answering with a different person pitching or you pitching, doesn't matter, and you're pitching them on a higher level thing, and so therefore you increase the overall amount of cash you're going to get. So for our main like business buying client as an example, she had a $9,000 offer with a $2,000 deposit to book the call. That was like the main offer. In between day 2 and day 3, she said, hey, by the way, if you make more than $1 million already with your business, it might make more sense for you to hear us out on our $35,000 offer, which is meant to like teach you how to acquire businesses to scale as a scaling tactic. And we had a good, I don't know the exact number, I'm not gonna make it up. There was a good amount of people though that said like, yeah, that's me. So they had a separate Zoom room just for those people specifically to get pitched, like a little silo pitch is what we call it. So you kind of do 2 things. So again, you repitch, you do the objection handling, you do the Q&A, you have a second person come in and do their version of a repitch. And to be clear, at the same time as that, you might have a silo pitch happening for some type of higher priced product, okay? And then usually what you do, just to close out day 3, like you do a closeout talk. And the closeout talk is very important to understand. The closeout talk is just straight content again, and you try to tie a bow on this whole thing for whatever the central topic point was, or if it's a challenge funnel, you want to go out there and encourage to go and take the actions for producing whatever result you're trying to get people to do. So in either scenario, the closeout talk makes people, again, kind of feel like you didn't just pitch them all of day 3. You know, it makes people feel like you still presented more content, more information, makes them walk away. It's the walk away talk where they say, dude, that was really good. You know, I'm really glad that I spent those 3 days like learning whatever I just learned and like, you know, mastering this topic that I just got access to. Now, to be really direct, okay, this specific flow, there's a bunch more little nuanced things that I could sit here and talk about. I'd say that I covered roughly, I'd say about 40%. Generally on YouTube, I try to withhold and I show about maybe 10 to 20% of everything that I know on a specific topic. In this case, I gave you about 40% of the things that I could have otherwise talked about. I save that other 60% or that other up to 90% on most of my videos for my inner circle members or for my master internet marketing students and of course my clients. If you're rich trying to get a whole lot richer, there's a link down to the inner circle below. It's called Jeremy's Inner Circle. Go check that out. It comes with twice a month one-on-one calls, weekly group calls, a quarterly mastermind right here at our venue and the good old Miami, Florida sunshine. We have an extensive training library, Jeremy AI access for real-time back and forth. You could just message me anytime. We do our quarterly in-person masterminds. Mastering Internet Marketing is its own program, 7-week live class. We do the class once a year. You buy in at any point, you get access to the previous cohort's recording, which is the most recent up-to-date information we have. Extensive SOP libraries in both of these programs. And you can preview week 1 of our 7-week class down there in the link in the description. There should be something that you see for that. So anyway, this flow, super good, very proven flow, something you can have a lot of confidence in if you're going to do your own virtual event, whether it's a challenge funnel, whether it's a 3-day virtual event. This flow fucks super hard. Very OP strategy and very excited to be able to present it to you here today. Go out there and get richer, and I look forward to helping you more. Talk soon.